is Mariana, and I'm educator at the Natural History Museum of Utah, and I'll be leading today our question and answer session of the Research Quest Live. So thank you so much for watching, and if you have any questions, please press the Ask a Question button or leave a comment on Facebook. And today we're really excited. We're going to talk with Christina Young. She's a PhD candidate from the University of Texas, El Paso. And thank you so much for participating, Christina. And how are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm so excited to be here with you. Just to let you know right away, they've decided to start construction right outside our window. So hopefully it's not too loud.
No, it's okay. Don't worry. Don't worry. You're totally fine. Thank you so much for participating. And I think we can start by you explaining a little bit your research. What do you think about that?
Sure. I'd love to. So hi everybody. My name is Christina Young, as she wonderfully introduced me. And what I study is biological soil crust. So usually at this point, I ask everybody around if they've ever heard of BioCrust before. But since I can't see anybody listening, I'll just explain it to you. And if you already know what it is, then you can just feel good that you do.
Yeah, I heard about it. I can say that I heard about it.
Yeah, you know about BioCrust. Okay, so I'm sitting right here in Moab, Utah, so in the southeast corner of the state. And what we have here is this incredible soil covering called biological soil crust. And it's made up of all these different organisms, cyanobacteria, lichens, mosses, algae, fungi that are living in between the plants on the desert soil. And so they are just kind of living at that 0 to 2 centimeter layer of the soil. And so what my research is for my PhD and for my master's was looking at what this soil crust is doing in desert ecosystems and what their role is alongside plants in how deserts function.
That's really, really cool. And I have to say that since the first time I heard about the crust, every time I'm in a hike or something, I'm like, I can see it. I can see it. Take care. Don't step on it. Yeah.
Yeah, we call it, it's like people are crust blind. They don't see it because they just don't know. People don't always know that there's this cool, beautiful covering. And then once you see it, you just see it all the time. And it's so exciting when you get to see crusts and come down to the Moab desert.
Yeah, it's so cool. It's so amazing. Yeah, I think maybe sometimes I thought I saw it and it was not exactly that, but we're going to ignore this part. And I just wanted to ask you if you can explain a little bit more to us what it would be like dryland science.
Sure. So drylands is kind of this catch-all word that is being used to kind of describe places that don't get a lot of water. So there's a way to measure what's called aridity, which is the amount of water that falls versus the amount of kind of heat that causes water to evaporate. And so the more that there's, it's basically thinking about when there's less water, it's more arid. And so there's all these different categories of what it means to be arid. It could be semi-arid, it could be cold, arid, it could be a hot desert, a cold desert, all these different kinds of ways of thinking about describing these dry places. And so scientists kind of came together and they're like, okay, let's call these dry lands. Drylands. So it became a science, a dryland science. Because what a lot of people don't recognize is that drylands actually cover 43% of the Earth's land surface. And so almost half of the land that we can walk on is a dryland. And so they're actually huge and vast and really important for all sorts of kind of global cycles that we think about, including, weather and carbon and all these different things. But they're really understudied compared to wetter places, because wetter places is kind of where a lot of us had tended to live in the past. It's where a lot of early Western science got started, and it's where we grow a lot of our food. So dry places weren't as studied in Western science as these wetter, we call them mesic, these wetter places. And so there's this kind of growing movement of dryland scientists who are recognizing, the importance of them, and also recognizing that dry places are expanding because of land use and climate change. And so we need to really understand them.
That's awesome. And I had no idea that it is 43% of like Earth. Like that's so
Yeah.
cool. Thank you.
And growing too.
And grow, yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, I have a question from Los Angeles, from Ada. She's asking, it's related to this, so that's why I'm asking this right now. She's asking, how can I get involved in dryland science as a high school student?
Oh, hi, Ada. Well, thanks for a great question. How can you get involved in dryland science? I think, you know, there's a lot of cool resources online and, reading about drylands. One of the places I often turn to actually that's kind of gives accessible information about dryland science is the United Nations. Last year was the year of kind of like thinking about what's called desertification. So places that maybe are deserts, but get even drier because of land use or climate and stuff. So there was a big desire to learn a lot. So I've always kind of just to learn things. I've read a lot that the UN, the United Nations, has on their website that's easily Googleable. And then another thing, a great thing to do is kind of just, you can potentially reach out to dryland scientists, and if you ever see a paper or read a name in a book about science, about that people are doing dryland science, scientists love to hear from people. We don't always talk to middle schoolers or students at all about our research. And so, we always have time to answer an email or to, talk about a project idea or anything. So you can always, all scientists' emails are very easily findable online. So if you see somebody that you're like, that's cool work, I want to learn more, just email them, including me. So feel free to email me after this. Hopefully we can get my email out there, and I'd love to help you connect you with dryland scientists specifically.
That's so cool. Thank you so much. And
Yeah.
I totally agree. And that's why I love like this type, like the research class Q&A part, because like then we can get like scientists in touch with like students. So that's so cool. And like connected to that, but like going back a little bit, I have a question from Salt Lake City. John is asking, what did you study in college to study like soils? I think that's a good question.
What did I study specifically in college? That was the question?
Yeah, like how did you start studying soils?
Oh, sure. So I didn't know what I wanted to do in college. I just showed up and I was like, oh, people go to college, right? Like that's what you're supposed to do. And I just didn't really know what I wanted to do. And to be honest, I didn't always really like science, like in high school and stuff. I didn't think I was very good at it. I wasn't that great at math. And I was like, oh, I don't know any scientists. Like, I can't be a scientist. Like, it didn't occur to me that was a thing. And so I was going to take I had to take one general biology class. But I heard it was kind of hard. I heard the class was kind of hard in college. And so I was like, I heard is easier is this class called botany, which is just like plants. And I'm like, plants, how hard could that be, right? Green things, it can't be that hard of a class. And so I signed up and I took it and it blew my mind. I was like, oh my gosh, there is so much going on in plants that I had no idea about. And it was just like this whole world opened up about these living things that I'd been kind of like walking through that I'd never really understood. And the more I got excited about plants, the more I got excited about what they were growing in. And so the soil. And so realizing that plants are amazing and there's a lot of questions about them, but there's even more questions that we don't have the answers to about the soil. Soils are called the black box, this kind of unknown, hard to look into box that Western science has a lot of trouble trying to answer questions about, not because it's impossible, just because it takes a lot of creativity and a lot of cool technologies to be able to think about how soils work. So I just kind of kept following what I found really interesting, and I ended up with a botany degree with an emphasis in soils.
That's so cool. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
And I have a question related to that, related to what you said, but before we continue, I just want to remind everybody who's watching, if you have a question, just please press the ask a question button or leave a comment on Facebook that we are getting all of your questions. I have a question from Mike. He's from California. And I have a question from Jake from Utah. They're like kind of related. Mike is asking, how do you study fossils? Soils, sorry. Sorry, I have a friend who talks a lot about fossils, so I kind of like have in my mind. And study soils. And Jake is asking, what tools do you use to study soils? And since you were talking about it, like that, like needing technology and creativity to do it, so like, can you talk a little bit? How do you do it?
Totally. Hi guys, thanks for the great questions. So, talking about soils, it's kind of like a big catch-all thing, right? So there's lots of different questions that you can ask about soils. And so some people study like, how are the particles in soils, like what is their texture and what are like the kind of more like physical properties of soils? How do they move with water? How do soils accumulate? Like, thinking about making soil for your garden. Like, so people kind of study that aspects of soils, and there's a lot of really cool physics that goes on there and trying to understand soil movement. What I study more is the life that lives inside of soils. And so I do a lot of stuff asking questions about the microbes that live in soils and the fungi that live in soils and the different things that live on the soil surface, like the biological soil crusts, which has both of those things, microbes and fungi. And so a lot of the techniques that I use involve things like genetic sequencing. So trying to understand like what kind of organisms are in the soil based on their genes and their DNA and RNA. And then a lot of things like looking under the microscope to look at what like species or forms of fungi are there, because there's so many different kind of organisms that can live in soils, even in these desert soils where we think that they're not that alive. And then the other thing that I'm really interested in is, because I study this life, is I ask questions about what are the nutrients in the soil. So just like us, we need to eat vegetables, unfortunately. And so to get nutrients to grow and be strong and be healthy. So just like us, plants need nutrients and other living things need nutrients. And so a lot of where those nutrients come from are the processes and turnovers that are going on in the soil. And so a lot of what I do is chemistry, and in a chemistry lab, extracting the nutrients out of soil cores, basically, and then measuring them on these pretty amazing, high-tech, but doable, but very cool to see machines that can give us things like how much, nitrogen is in the soil, how much phosphorus, really common nutrients that are essential for growth.
That's so cool. So like this is the type of like you mean like taking a really good picture, like tools that you use to measure like this type of nutrients. Is that like the types of tools that you use for your research?
Yeah, I mean, like a physical tool. The tool I use most is a soil core, right? Like something that's like like a 3 foot long. It's like, usually we usually are interested in like the top 0 to 5 centimeters and 2 to 10, and then we just core the soil. And then I put the soil in a bag and I bring it back, and then I usually do some kind of we put that soil and we pour like salty water. It's not exactly salt, but it's something similar to salt. And that kind of kicks all the nutrients that are sticking to the soil out into those solutions so that the nutrients are kind of available in water. And then we filter that water out. And then we use pretty fancy like machines in the chem lab to measure the chemistry of that water that's been extracted the soil. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's really, really cool.
So that's what I use. And then a hand lens to look at the lichens and mosses and stuff that live on the soil crust. Or those are the tools I use most.
That's so cool. Thank you for sharing. I have a question from Holly from Salt Lake City. She says, "Hey, Christina, thanks for sharing your knowledge. How do you think we should care for the biological soil crust? How do we recreate responsibility in the desert?" Oh, I like this. Questions are awesome. If you want to start with the first one, I can say the next one again.
Yeah. So the question was, how do we care? How do we care about the biocrust?
Yeah. How should we care for the biological soil crust? Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So the thing about soil crusts, right, is that they're pretty fragile. And it's this really interesting thing because they're both really tough and they're really fragile. So they're tough in one way in that, so these soil crusts kind of create this covering over the soil surface because their bodies kind of weave together, and that's why it's called a crust. It's like a pie crust. It's woven together and hard, and what it does is it makes sure that the sand underneath it doesn't blow away, so that the desert doesn't become like the Sahara Desert. You know, like Moab doesn't look like the Sahara. It could, but the reason it doesn't is because the soil crust is keeping it so that the sand doesn't just blow everywhere. So it's really strong in that way, but it's really weak when there are these kind of what you call compressional forces. So forces that are coming from the top. And so things that like a car tire or a footstep or a hoof or something, a bike tire, you know, the compressional pressures that kind of break it up from the top, it just kind of dissolves this kind of web, this crust that is being created, and it makes it so it can't hold the soil together anymore. And so the best thing that you can do for crust is just not bust it. So maybe people have heard, don't bust the crust. And so the thing that you can do is not step on it, and to not go off trail, and to not do things that would cause the crust to break apart. But that being said, I want you to look at it too, because everyone talks about like, don't bust the crust, but I think it's also really cool to get down next to the crust and take a really close look, because it is so much cooler than I think you could ever imagine from what am I, 5'8", you know, looking down so far, it just looks like black dots on the bumps on the ground. It doesn't look like anything cool. But when you get really close, it's actually phenomenal. There's all these colors and forms and different weird shapes, and they're all growing together. And so I think the way we care for the crust is don't step on it and don't mess it up, but also like start appreciating how cool it really is. It's really cool.
Yeah, so like having knowledge about it, like paying attention on it, can be a way maybe to recreate this responsibility from like the desert, because that was like the second question, like how do we recreate this responsibility in the desert? Oh, and if you have like any pictures of crust that you would like to share or something, that would be awesome too.
Totally, this would be a good spot. I can show you. I can show you some crust that I have. Let me figure out how to. Here we go. Start share. Okay. Pull it up for you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So can you see this beautiful crust I have?
Yes.
Yeah. So for people who've never seen it before, this is really close to where I live. I'm very lucky to live down here in Moab. Yeah. And so what you see here is you see this path, right? So this is where you want to walk. All around this, all this dark covering in between the plants, this is all biocrust. And you can really see the difference between this area where people have walked, me included, and me and my dog, and then this really beautiful crust. And you can see from above, you know, maybe beautiful is like not the right word when you're just like looking at it from like this high. But when you get down in there, it is just the coolest. And so here's right next to where I took that picture. I just kind of turned to my side and I got down, and here's a cacti, and then here is all this biocrust all around it. And so these are lichens, these yellow things here. This is all lichen. This is moss, this kind of greenish color here. And then there's all sorts of cyanobacteria, this darker color all around. And the cyanobacteria is dark because what it actually is doing is it creates its own sunscreens because of how bright the sun is down here in the desert. It creates its own pigments like that are sunscreens to protect the cyanobacteria from the sun's UV. So this is what the biocrust looks like. And this is it. I'm cheating a little because this is when it's wet. And so when it's wet, it looks especially cool. And so if you're out there and you want to see it in its glory, give it some water and wait a few minutes, and you can actually watch all these organisms kind of come to life, because part of the really cool thing. I know, it's so cool.
Yeah, that's how I saw it for the first time. It was so cool. Like we were just looking at it, and then someone came and like put some water, and we're like, oh, so cool.
It's magical. It's really cool.
So cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay. So now I have a question from Annie from Utah. She's asking, what is it like doing research out in dry land, and is it always hot? That's a good question.
That's a great question. Well, I love places where you can see really far. So I think doing research in drylands is amazing because you always have these incredible vistas. Also doing research out there, you're out in a desert area, and it's so cool because there's so much still unknown about deserts because like I said, they're just not as studied as other ecosystems. So you can be out there just standing in this desert and looking around, and you can come up with 10 questions that we don't have the answers to. And that's a really cool feeling. And your question about, are they always hot, is a great one. And the answer is no, right? So deserts, it's actually not about heat that defines a desert. It's about dryness. So one of the biggest deserts in the world is actually in Antarctica. It's a desert, and all the Antarctica is a desert because there's just not a lot of precipitation. There's dry valleys in Antarctica that haven't seen any water in decades, right? The dry valleys of Antarctica, it's a thing. I'd love to go see it. So no, you wouldn't be hot there at all. You would be quite cold. And
really?
So, yeah. And so, so when you think about drylands, also consider that some places are, some dry places are cold. And here in Moab, in the winter, it's pretty darn cold.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah.
I was just like, wow. Oh. Yeah, and I just want to remind everybody who's watching again that if you have a question, just press the ask a question button or leave a comment on Facebook. Since you were talking about like a little bit like going to like field work and like you were talking before like about the tools you use, I have a question from Grace. She's from New Orleans, and she's asking, do you have any fun or scary stories from your field work?
Ooh, fun or scary?
Or maybe a question, maybe a story that you'd like to share that doesn't have to be specifically like fun or scary, but if you have like a story that you'd like to share, that would be really cool.
Yeah, well, there was one time. Okay, so there's this place in Canyonlands National Park here around
Oh,
Utah.
I've been there.
Yeah, Canyonlands is amazing, and it's kind of got these different sections, and we were in this section called the Needles, and it's got all of these incredible sandstone spires, and it's full of all these canyons, and there's this one really special place in Canyonlands that we used to go to every year. Other people do, I don't get to go anymore, but and the place has it's not been ever grazed before. So a lot of Southeast Utah has had a lot of cows grazing in them. And those cows kind of like, mess up the crust if there's a lot of them. And in the past, there was a lot of them that were kind of in this area. There's a lot less now. But there's this one area that is kind of hard to get to. You have to kind of squeeze up between some boulders and then kind of do some weird move. But then once you get up there, you're in this giant grassland that's covered in crust, but it's never been grazed. And there's only a few places that are big and accessible to us like that left in all of Southeast Utah. And so we would go there each year, and it takes a long time to get to there. And one time we were there and it was late, we'd been sampling the crust all day, it was getting late. And there were some clouds kind of gathering in the distance. This was in the fall. And there's some clouds in the distance, and we were like, oh, those look like they could be maybe rain clouds. We were like, oh, we just got to get this done. We got to get this done. So we're going, and the clouds, we're not really watching them, but they're just building and building and building. And then, the way out is this pretty narrow little area. And so, we finished our last plot, and then all of a sudden there's this thunderclap, and thunder reverberates off the sandstone, and water just starts pouring, and it just starts pouring from every angle. And we're just looking at this one little slot that we have to run to go through to get out of this area. And we're just run. And so we just run out, and we were just and then water is just pouring and coming after us, and it's getting higher and higher, and we were running, and then finally we're not gonna beat the water. And so we have to climb up and out and sit on this really high ledge in this canyon and just watch this flash flood just like go through and like take out all the sediment and soil and keep going down the canyon. And we got to watch it pass, and it was amazing, and an amazing reminder of how waters really can be crazy in the desert.
Yeah.
That was the most exciting and scary thing, was watching
Yeah.
this flood go by.
Yeah, I think I would definitely call this like a scary story. I was just like kind of scared. But if you thought it was like exciting, that's awesome. Like I think it's really subjective. I have a really cool question from Bernie from Washington. He's asking, how long does it take for crust to grow back after it gets busted? And he has a second question: does cyanobacteria grow back after a flash flood?
Those are both excellent questions. And that question about like how long does it take to grow is the question that I get most all the time. And so unfortunately, I have the frustrating answer is that it depends. It's going to depend. And so just like any other living thing, you know, if you plant a tomato plant somewhere that is really dry, it's going to grow a lot slower and take a lot longer to become a tomato than if you plant it in a really wet, nice little place. And so the same with crusts. And so if it is a really dry year and the crust gets busted, it's not going to recover, you know, or if it's a dry 5 years, 10 years, it's not going to recover as much as if it gets more water. Or if you busted the crust in a wetter region of where the crust was growing than a drier region, it's going to take longer, say in the Sonoran Desert, than it was going to take in Colorado Plateau Desert, because the Sonoran Desert is just so much drier. It also depends on how you busted it. And so if you ran over it with a tank, you've really busted it, right? Like you've really compressed it. But if you've like pushed your finger into it, it's gonna regrow, you know, within a matter of months. And so it ranges from like a few years to like decades for regrowth.
Yeah, it's still like a long time, I think, yeah. Wow.
Yeah, it's gonna be a long time. And yeah, after flash floods, cyanobacteria is the one of the first colonizers. So it'll come back if especially if there was water, and if there's repeated water, it'll come back pretty quick.
That's really good. That's why we have to take care and not bust them.
Exactly.
Yeah, I have a really cool question from Haiti from Kansas is asking, how many different things live in desert soils? And I think that's interesting because we were talking about like you're showing pictures of the crust and how many things live there. But can you share like some more things that live in the desert and soil?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it's really cool. In some of these deserts, kind of the most diversity, you know, we like to talk about like species diversity and stuff. And when you look out over a desert, sometimes there's more diversity in the soil than there is in the plants. And that's pretty cool. So yeah, there's, like I said, there's cyanobacteria is kind of like the main part of BioCrust. And then there's all these different species of lichens and mosses. There's, you know, like something like 40 or more species that can be found in throughout different regions. And of course, lichens is 3 different species together, right? It's a symbiosis. So, you know, you have all that life there. And then you also have a ton of bacteria. So like heterotrophs, so things that aren't like cyanobacteria that don't make their energy from the sun, but that eat other things. So you have a ton of those. And then you have archaea, which is like the newest bacteria kingdom. You have a ton of fungi, which really don't know a lot about them in the desert soils. And so they're super cool. You have green algae, and then you have microarthropods, like you've probably heard of water bears, those adorable. Yeah, we have a lot of those. We have springtails. So this really little like you can see it under a microscope, these really cool things. They look like little insects, but they have a spring in their tail and they can hop really far. They're the coolest little things. And yeah, so there's just all of these different things living together. It's its own ecosystem, really, which is really cool.
That's so cool. Yeah, we're getting out of time, but before we finish, I heard that you have a podcast of like science. So I would like just to listen, like you saying like the name of your podcast and like what you talk about, just so everybody can listen. And because I love podcasts and I love science podcasts, so like if you like to share with us, that would be awesome.
Totally, I'd love to. So We down here, we have a podcast called Science Moab. And what it does is it talks about all the different science that's going on in this region. And so it's interviews with scientists who are doing work here, and it's about the work they're doing. So it covers everything from ecology to archaeology to paleontology, all the different sciences, because there's so much science going on in Southeast Utah. So check it out and let us know what you think.
Definitely. And for everybody who's watching today, just check it out. It's Moab Science.
Science Moab.
Science
and you
Moab.
can find about sciencemoab.org. You could find all the information.
Awesome. So yeah, I invite everybody to listen to it. And I want to thank you so much, Christina, for being here with us. I think everybody learned a lot. I know I learned a lot. So thank you so much. And thank you so much for everybody who's watching. And we have class tomorrow with Aiden again. It's going to be awesome. 9:30 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time. And see you all tomorrow. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.